And good afternoon to all of you joining us today at MusiCafe. I'm so glad to hear from all of you. Last week we had that great interview with Emanuele Baldini, which I'm grateful again. And today we have a very special conversation. It will be our very first non-musical musical conversation, and I want to hop right away into it. I want to bring our guest today, Stephen Hecht. Stephen, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks for asking me, Alex.
Thank you. I haven't seen you in a while. Last time I was exactly there where you are right now in La Croche in Quebec. Obviously, staying as far away as you can from the virus going around. How have you been? How's the family? How are the kids?
Thanks for asking. I've been well, thank you. I'm very blessed to be in a safe place at our cottage. I've been here since February the 26th, which wasn't planned for sure, and I just stayed put. As you know, my wife Naomi has an autoimmune disease, and she, being of the age and having being immunocompromised, would be in a high risk target group, as would I, less so. And as a result, we are staying away and doing everything we can to be socially distant and being careful, which is hard for my wife. She's more of an extrovert than I am, and very close with her kids. She's got 3, I've got 4. So it's been a challenge. But again, we're very lucky to be here. We're at our lake house, so we now that the snow is melted, as of May the 7th, we're able to jump in the lake and to start the day and end the day, and have nothing to complain about.
Great. When I asked you to join us, you said, but I don't know anything about music. But I do remember very well that we had a lot of Latin music when I was there, and we cooked for days on end. So there is a little bit of music. We had the classical music and Latin. So we had a lot of fun that winter. Not last winter, but the winter before that. It was a lot of fun. I remember so fondly those moments. So I wanted to invite you to be with me here today. Most people wouldn't know, but I put there's a plug. Nonflict. You wrote this book with Amir Kfir. And it's a very interesting read, and I should explain that you're also the chief executive peacemaker of Million Peacemakers. You've got the Medal Peace Prize from YMCA. You work quite heavily with YPO around the world, and you left the real estate business. And I guess you didn't have anything better to do, so you decided to make world peace. So how did that happen? Why did you decide to leave regular business and get into something that is extremely complicated?
You mean there's conflict out there?
Yeah.
I have a lot of work to do. But before we start,
a little
thank
bit.
you for the question, and I'll get to it. I just want to show you, in your honor, because you're from Mexico, I'm drinking. This is from Mexico, from Puebla, that I picked up, and I'm in Quebec, but I know you're in Toronto, and I got my Balzac's 5 pounds of coffee here because I don't want to run out during COVID. So in your honor, for this
Thank you.
Music Cafe, I've got my Mexican mug with Toronto coffee. So it's been a bit of a journey, how I got from being a business person to doing what I'm doing now. It started with an event that I did for a group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, when I was the Quebec learning officer. And we learn in the Old Testament and the New Testament to love your neighbor as yourself. That's in Leviticus 19 and Mark 12:30. And I always thought, well, how do you love your neighbor if you don't know them? Don't know them, you don't like them. If you don't like them, you don't love them. So I took our members with our spouses and young adult children to a Catholic church, a mosque, and an Orthodox synagogue. We were all within a 1 kilometer radius of each other. So we were neighbors, but we didn't really know each other. So first we went to the Catholic Church. A lot of our members are French Canadian, so they'd been to church before. But we had a great leader, Father John Walsh. Then we went to the mosque. None of us are Muslim in our group. None of us have been to a mosque before. And I brought in the top imam in Canada, Dr. Imam Zija Delik, to lead the afternoon services and talk about Islam. And we were with members of the mosque and their kids and spouses. And we took them all with the rabbi, priest, and our group to my synagogue, an Orthodox synagogue down the road, where my rabbi explained about Judaism, took out a Torah, and we had a moderator, Bob Scully, ask questions of the rabbi, priest, and imam. And he asked some tough questions. When he got to the imam, he asked, why is invariably Muslim people blowing themselves up, killing innocent women and children in the name of Islam? And the tension was very high, and the imam's answer was, I could start by talking about our differences, and I might never get to our similarities. Or I could start by talking about what our three religions have in common with each other. And maybe, just maybe, the difference could take care of themselves. We pray to the same God, the three of us. Abraham is our forefather in years. We're related by blood. We believe in the same Holy Land. So we started talking about those commonalities. The tension between the three of them and the audience went way down. So that idea stuck with me. And then we had a kosher, halal-friendly dinner, fathers to sit with fathers, mothers with mothers, kids with kids, to discover those commonalities. To finish the evening, we had people stand up and hold hands while the rabbi, priest, and imam said a prayer for peace. Now, I was holding Father John's hand, and they were trembling. Looking around the room, there were tears in people's eyes. So at that moment, we had love in the room. So we went from not knowing our neighbor to love in 4 hours. Then they asked me to chair the education program for our Canadian region. And I said, let's take the learning of that event a step further to action. Conflict had been a big part of my life. I've been married 28 years, but this is my third marriage. I'm about on Sunday to celebrate my 11th anniversary, which I never got before. I was married 9 years twice with 4 children from my first marriage. Very happily married my third time around. So I had conflict from my relationships. I had conflict in my family business where I was third generation. And I was also interested in geopolitical conflict. And our members across the country agreed to do this event on conflict resolution. I thought I'd hire an expert to lead it, and I bought a dozen books on the topic, including a book behind me, a 950-page handbook on conflict resolution. But I found them very difficult for a non-PhD to go through. They were typically by PhDs for PhDs. And we needed something very practical for our group, and that's when I was introduced to Dr. Amir Kafir, who had worked with our members from conflict zones such as Israelis and Arabs, Greeks and Turks, Turks and Armenians, and he agreed to facilitate the event. And we put together a team of academics and practitioners with the goal that any model we came up with had to work for any conflict, an internal conflict, a personal, business, family conflict, or geopolitical conflict, and it had to be so simple it fit on the back of a business card. And that was the challenge, and that's the back of my business card,
Okay.
which has the steps of the Nonflict way. So it replaces that 950-page handbook behind me.
I have it here.
By the way, you do.
I have it. I do have it because you signed the book for me when we met. So you gave me the card. I have it.
And ideally, we'd have peacemakers, 1 million people with the same card with their own name, and you could all say, when you're introducing yourself, what do you do? I'm a doctor, lawyer, architect, engineer, or I clean garbage, and I'm a peacemaker. So ultimately, we're looking for that. So we did that workshop in 2012, May 2012, with about 700 of our members and spouses and young adult children, and people were resolving the toughest conflicts of their life right then and there. And just for fun, I asked them, we added an extra hour for them to role play being Palestinians and Israelis in the conflict over Jerusalem, just to see what would happen. And they really got into it. We had them more kefiyas or kippot, and they came up with amazing ideas, even though they're going through a very emotional conflict or role-playing a very emotional conflict. And the idea was I wanted them to be my guinea pigs to do it 9 months later in Israel before our Turkey global conference. And I then got buy-in to do it there in Jerusalem with our Israel and Palestine chapter. But 3 days before, I decided to go with my wife and stepson to a Palestinian refugee camp to try it on a tougher audience. So I went to the other side of the wall in a place called Kalandia. And I visited a women's co-op in the refugee camp. And I met with these activist women. And the 84-year-old founder, and it was all through a translator, her first question to me around the table with other women was, "You're from Canada. Your prime minister did not accept us as a state in the UN. What did the Palestinians do against Canadians?" So my answer to her, after I thought about it, was, that's true, our prime minister did that, but I'm not a politician, I'm a business person that travels around the world, and all that I and the people I meet know about you is what we hear about in the media. Would you be willing to share your true stories that I could then share when I travel? So she said, okay. So we went around the table and they shared their stories, and I took them through the steps of Nonflict, which is to understand ourselves and the other. And when we take the time to do that, we realize we have commonality, because what's important to me is often important to you. We all want to feel respected, understood, safe, and have hope for the future for ourselves, our children, and grandchildren. Right? Step 2 of Nonflict is to understand that shared reality, and step 3 is to co-create, where we visualize our ideal reality, look at the obstacles to achieve it, then what could we do to take action to overcome the obstacles that we could control or influence. So when we got to that last question on what action they could do, she came and she hugged my wife, the founder, and looked at me in the eye and said, "Thank you for being a friend to the Palestinians. We like what we learned. We're going to use it with our husbands. But more importantly, we're prepared to meet 15 Jewish Israeli women. And if you could get Obama, Netanyahu, and Abbas in a room, we mothers won't let them out till there's a deal." And at that moment, I realized I had in my hand that card as a gift to the world I needed to share. Because if they're willing to sacrifice being accused of collaboration with the enemy and normalization for the sake of freedom, the least I could do is do whatever I can to share the Nonflict way as much as I can around the world. So I left my career in real estate after that and started or co-founded Million Peacemakers.
It's quite an amazing story. When you ask me why, I don't know anything about music and why would I be on the Music Cafe, I really wanted to bring you on because I am, as probably everybody else in the world, we're suffering of a tremendous amount of stress that is inflicted on us by conflict that is not related to us. You turn on the news, you see what's going on everywhere, right? But, especially south of us, where there seems to be a culture lately of conflict. And I am not asking you how to solve that, but how do we solve internally our conflict with what's going on to try to live in a more peaceful way? Because we're constantly on stress. Everybody's on the edge, especially now that we're locked away for months on end. Everybody really is on edge. So how do you recommend to handle this constant pressure of, there's tremendous conflict everywhere. There's conflict now within the U.S. Forget about the political issue. Within the population. And I'm not saying that it started now. It just became more apparent now than ever, probably. So,
yeah, it's a big issue, and I think focusing on what we can control to start, and our own internal conflicts within our homes. So a lot of us are at home in different environments with people that we ideally love, but we're not used to being together 24/7. Mm-hmm. And I had a lady I've known for a long time say, "Steve, I love my," and she's been married 30 years. "Steve, I love my husband. I want to effing kill him right now." and I did actually with my wife 2 Fridays ago, I did a Nonflict workshop for couples, and we had 350 odd people register for an hour and a half. So clearly there's a need out there. for dealing with conflicts. So many of us have financial stress now. A lot of our businesses are impacted. My wife sells clothing to retailers who are shut. She had to let go a lot of people, and revenues went down significantly. I was supposed to be traveling and getting paid for our nonprofit. And by the way, I'm a volunteer, but our nonprofit was going to get paid for me doing workshops around the world, and it all got canceled. A lot of us are feeling financial stress. We're feeling security stress, safety. So there's certainly a lot of inner conflict. So our model is good for internal conflict as well, and certainly conflict within the family. And we do that. And one of the questions I know that was helpful for the couples as an icebreaker, I said, "What do you appreciate about your partner now? What can you most appreciate about them?" And that is one of the questions in Nonflict, which is where we understand our shared reality, put people in a better frame of mind, or what good could potentially be coming out of this crisis that we're in. There is opportunity in crisis. The Chinese symbol for crisis is the same one as opportunity. It's just, and often the greater the crisis, the greater the opportunity. So for me, I see many opportunities. In our case, I have the opportunity of not having to travel and spending more quality time with my wife, who I'm very fortunate to be with. We're looking at creating workshops, virtual workshops. I don't have to travel as much. I was spending half my time in airplanes and hotels and without my family. In our case, we partnered with Amazon. We now have an Alexa skill for Nonflict. So it's virtual. Anyone could, if you have, any of your listeners have an Alexa device, you could enable a skill called Nonflict. It will work, talk you and your partner or you yourself through a conflict.
The first time that I used Alexa was in your kitchen to set up the timers to make sure that we didn't burn anything.
Yeah, there are over 200 million of them. And by the way, we made a roasted tomato salsa last night. Naomi did. I was thinking of you because we did that together as well.
We did.
So in dealing with stuff that we can control, because some of it, there's so much out there, there's so much conflict out there. And I think we have the opportunity as well in how we deal with it ourselves to be better role models for the next generations. Because we learn from our role models, be it our parents or grandparents or mentors, how to deal with conflict. And now is a great time to show how to deal with it constructively, because we need conflict. Conflict is merely two or more different perspectives coming in contact with each other. By definition, it's neither positive or negative. It's how we deal with it is either constructive or destructive. So you need different perspectives for innovation and growth, be it individually or in families or in businesses or geopolitically. So our goal is to transform the world by giving people the tools to reframe conflict into nonflict.
You know, when there's a movie, and it's a very bad movie, Miscongeniality, and I use one line of that film all the time when I go to a coffee shop and whatnot. They ask me, "What do you want?" I say, "World peace," and everybody looks at me weird, because sorry, we're not serving that today. It seems so ambitious, and I guess the conflicts are, I guess, harder right now because it's when we're leaving, but it seems to be that there's always been conflict. It seems to be that's the way that humanity lives. There's no such a thing as the good old times. And the good old times is our perception of what used to be, apparently. I wanted to ask you particularly about the book. I reread the book. It's the second time that I read it. You open up tremendously when you wrote the book. There's a lot of examples of Amir and yourself, and you write things that most people would not dare talk about like in your personal life, you talk about your relationship with your wife. You talk about very openly about 2 divorces, about your relationship with the kids. It's very unusual. How and why did you take this approach to open up like completely? You're completely exposed on the book.
First, I did get permission from the people that I shared with, and I didn't open up as much as perhaps I would have because I didn't get permission for a few things. Um, and why is because I think when we leaders open up and show that we're not perfect, we make mistakes, and we continue to make mistakes, and that other people feel safe enough to open up as well. So it's leadership by example. I've made so many mistakes, and hopefully I've learned, and if not, I probably repeated them a few times until I did learn, and I have so much more to learn. And I think I try to learn every day and from every interaction from anyone. There's the ability to do so. So being authentic and being vulnerable, I think, has served me well, and just who I am, I guess. I wasn't always that way. I could tell you that I lived the opposite way for 20 plus years of my life. When I was younger, an uncle of mine, who was my mentor, passed away when I was 20 of a massive heart attack. He was 58, and I was very close to him. And when he died, he had left me the ability by controlling interest in my family business ahead of my father, uncles, cousins, and siblings. And at that time, I was therefore unable to grieve. I had family members who maybe weren't that happy with me, and I had to deal with a lot of conflict. So I became very stoic and shut down in order to protect myself. So maybe now I'm compensating or overcompensating, don't know.
Usually, I mean, the biggest conflicts are really not what we think they are. Like the smaller conflicts are bigger. I think we share a lot of conflict in families. They seem to be not that big. You know, you're usually more worried about your conflicts in business and what's going on around you that in family. Do you find that people tend to, push their family? I think that those are my priorities, solving issues within the family, within the loved ones. It's what you tend to avoid the most. I know that in my case, we avoid, like in my close family, meaning my mom, my sisters, we always avoided conflict. And we never solved the conflict, we avoided it. Like we just didn't talk about it. It didn't go away. Is that something we avoid because we are too busy with other things, or we just want to forget about it?
So 2 points that are important that you make. When we did this workshop across the country, people were able to, there's CEOs were able to choose any conflict they're having to work on. 90% of the members chose a family conflict over a business conflict. 6 months after our workshop, I got an email from a person named Jason in Toronto. Said, Steve, I attended your workshop. Thank you. The timing was impeccable. I was about to have a union negotiation, and the attitude I was going to go in with for sure would have resulted in a strike. But I used your model, and putting myself in their shoes, I realized if I had me as a boss, I probably would have gone on strike too. So I transformed my attitude, and I have great relations with my union. But just yesterday, he said, I was in the car with my wife and 16-year-old daughter. We're visiting colleges, and my daughter and wife got into a huge fight, and my daughter was swearing at my wife. And I pulled over my car. I couldn't take it anymore. I took that card out of my wallet, that Nonflict card, and I went through the questions. And one of the questions is, as we mentioned earlier, what's working well for you around this conflict? What can you appreciate about the other person? And my daughter realized she had a mother who was giving her unconditional love and time and was always there for her, no matter what. And she couldn't necessarily say that about all her mothers, her friends' mothers. And at that point, she realized she had an amazing mother, and it ended up in hugs and tears. And that's when he wrote to me. He didn't write me when it helped him save a union strike. He wrote me when it helped his wife and 16-year-old daughter. So your point that people really care about their families, even ahead of their businesses, is certainly there, because we're always going to have our family businesses come and go. Um, as far as avoiding conflict, um, I'd say when we survey people, about a third of the people say they avoid conflict or flee from conflict as a go-to way. About a third of them use force or power. These are those were CEOs who have the power to hire and fire. Folding, or just giving the other person what they want, would be another way. And a fourth way was 50-50 or compromise. So it's pretty evenly split. But most of us, how we deal with conflict is impacted by how our parents or role models or guardians dealt with conflict growing up. So if conflict was avoided as in your family, you're more likely to be avoiding it. So in my case, for example, I probably avoided a lot because I associated conflict with negative things, so I avoid pain. My wife calls it turtling. I get into my protective shell and don't make eye contact. No one could hurt me. So even now, I'm very trained in Nonflict, and I'll use that, but sometimes my go-to instinct would be to avoid conflict.
I see. You chose like very, very, very difficult conflicts to try to solve, like the Arab-Israeli conflict. One thing that I'm very impressed. I have to say that this was the most complicated interview to prepare for, as well. You were invited to the Vatican, an institution with a lot of conflict out of left, right, and center field. How did that happen? And what's your what is it that you're doing there? I'm very interested because it's a huge. Obviously, it's one of the largest religious, not only religious, but one of the biggest institutions in the world. How did it come to be? Because I'm fascinated, not by the conflict, but I'm fascinated. Every time I go to the Vatican, I've been fortunate enough to be at the museum and whatnot. I'm tremendously fascinated. How did it come to be that you were invited there? And what do you bring to the table?
It was interesting. We have every July, although this year it'll be virtual, a team meeting with our with people in Million Peacemakers who are working on different projects. And we had a young person 2 years ago who said, when we were talking about how to scale Nonflict, she said, "I'm Catholic. I had to meet my priest when I got married, or before I got married. And it would have been great if they gave me the tools to deal with conflict constructively, if they taught Nonflict, because I have a lot of conflict with my husband now. And, they were trying to give me instruction, the priest, but he's never been married before." So I thought that was a good idea. And because there are 1.2 odd billion people, Catholics in the world. And so I had to be in London on October the 16th, this was July, and I saw that London, Rome was a 2-hour flight. So I said, let me see if I could go to Rome on the 15th, which was a Monday, and meet the Pope and give him that idea and see if we could progress with that. So I put that.
Nobody just says, let me go to see if I can meet the Pope. I mean,
no, I did. So I wrote down in my agenda, meet the Pope on October the 15th, and I blocked out the day for it. So that's my ideal reality. We visualize our ideal reality within Nonflict, and then what are the obstacles to achieve it? Is I didn't know the Pope. I'm a Jewish guy in Montreal. What do I have to do with that? And he didn't return my email. I sent an email. It came back. It bounced back. So one of my board members is Argentinian Catholic. He's Argentinian Catholic, and I asked Laura, do you know the Pope? And she said no. Now what do I do? So I would ask people if I was trying to find some kind of introduction to the Vatican. I wasn't having luck. It was now end of August. I was invited to a cocktail party, and I'm an optimist. I hadn't yet booked my ticket to London because I was hoping to do Rome, London. I was at a cocktail party, and there was a gentleman there with a brown robe and a cross. I said, maybe he knows the Pope. So I went to him and introduced myself, and he was the Bishop of Montreal. And I said, oh, that's good. And I mentioned the idea we had, and he said, well, that's a great idea. I said, wonderful. Do you know if the Pope's available October the 15th? I have an opening.
Yeah. I have his agenda right now.
And he said, I'm really sorry. There's going to be a bishops' conference all of October. So the Pope is busy with that. But I happen to know the Cardinal in charge of peace, Cardinal Turkson, and the Cardinal in charge of families, Cardinal Farrell, and maybe they'd be interested. So I autographed a book for each of the cardinals and for the bishop, and he went off to Rome, and I booked my ticket to London. But because I didn't have the appointment yet, I kept asking people, and I went for my haircut, pre-COVID haircut, and my barber's Italian. I said, "Hey, Giovanni, you know the Pope?" I said, "Steve, come on. How can you ask such a question? And besides, he's Argentinian." And I said, "Well, you know a lot of people, Giovanni. You never know." He said, "Well, it's funny you ask, because the person whose hair I cut right before yours showed me a picture of his son meeting the Pope. Maybe he could help." So I called the father, who introduced me to the son, who introduced me to the person who runs his Rome office. And I contacted him, Robert Hassan, and I told him the idea. And he said, "Steve, your timing is impeccable. The Vatican has asked me to help work on an event called Religions and the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And because 82% of the world identify as being part of a religion, and not a lot of politicians have taken action toward these Sustainable Development Goals, and the Pope was hoping that religious leaders could take action. Maybe they'll agree for you to be in the audience, because there are 400 seats." I said, "Would I get to meet the Pope to give this idea?" And he said, "No, only religious leaders, top religious leaders, or the UN are invited to speak on the panels." And I said, "Well, let me try." So I wrote an email that he could forward to the cardinal in charge, talking about the work we've done with interfaith conflict, such as Palestinians, Israelis, Jordanians, and Syrians that I've worked with. I also included an homily of Father John on the teachings of Christ aligned with Nonflict, and that was the father from that religious event I mentioned. And I sent it off, and Robert called me 2 weeks later and said, "Steve, it's a miracle. They not only took you to be an attendee, but they want you to be in the final panel on how the religious leaders could take action to using Nonflict to achieve any of the SDGs, because there's conflict in achieving any of them."
Right.
So that's what happened. So I was invited there last March, and I went there, and after speaking, and it so happened that the cardinal who got my book was the one running that conference. So when they saw my email, he said, "Oh, I read the book." So that's the serendipity from two different ways getting in, coming together in this friendly universe. So I made the speech, which for all these 400 religious leaders and the UN, on how they could use Nonflict to make their communities more harmonious and teach it to their youth and to their congregations. And then they invited me back 30 days later to be part of the Catholic working group of advising the Pope on peace and nonviolence. So that was interesting.
So you got to meet the Pope after?
The first time. So we gave him the book, which I had Laura, the Argentinian Catholic, help write in Spanish. And he did get our book. And so then to continue the cooperation, I was actually doing an event with YPO at the Vatican that was going to be this September, called Love Your Neighbor the Nonflict Way. And we were, it obviously got postponed or canceled due to COVID.
Right. Well, it's an amazing story. You think I can meet the Pope? It would be. It's a very interesting position, right? The position of the Pope. I saw the film, which is obviously a film of the two popes, the current Pope and the past Pope. That's one of those junctures in history where we actually have two living popes at the same time.
And the black cardinal, by the way, Cardinal Turkson, was in that movie, and he might be the next pope. He was the cardinal who ran it. And by the way, there was a musical component, just to put in music. I believe singing together brings people and opened up people's heart together. There's an Israeli group called Kululam, Kolulam, Kululam. They bring communities together. They started with bringing in Israelis and Palestinians, and they brought in Israelis, Palestinians, and Christians in Jerusalem. I was going to have them come to and everyone, the audience become the performers. We all sing together, and it's filmed and shared on social media. And we were going to do that at the Sistine Chapel, have them lead it for children, with children, because our future and we all care about our children. So the attendees and the children and the Pope, the plan was to have us all sing together a song that would really help people realize we're all part of the same world. We have, or from a religious perspective, we're all made in God's image, and we're all part of the same planet and have the same needs. We all want the same thing, and music is very powerful in bringing people together and opening up people's hearts. So we do use that when we do our workshops. We have music at the beginning, music at the end, and there's a lot of power in that.
I live literally for music, so I can identify clearly. I have to say that one of the greatest conductors, when they play at the Vatican, when they have one of the biggest concerts was when Leonard Bernstein was conducting. So there you go, another Jewish guy there conducting at the Vatican. Very, very interesting, very melding of the religions, of the cultures. It's a pleasure talking to you, Stephen. We're at the end, as you see. I'm running out of coffee. I've
got a lot here for you, Alex.
There's more coffee there. I want to finish today. There you go. It's not that far from here, Balzac's. I want to finish up by asking you, the quintessential question in this kind of thing. What's the hope for the future? We're starting to open up here in Canada our economy, which really doesn't mean much. It means that we can go out for a coffee maybe. But it feels that the next few months, maybe a year or whatnot, it's going to be full of complications. What is the hope? There's some days that I feel tremendously overwhelmed on what's going on everywhere. So what is the hope for us who are a little older, and for he's on that side, and our children? What do we have to look forward to?
I'm part of a group called Good After COVID that are working on that, and within YPO we're working on that, and I'm vice chair of our Peace Action Network that's working on that. And I think the hope is that this has been a nice pause to look, and we need crisis, or often you need a crisis in order to take action toward change. And hopefully some of us will realize that we do need to change. Things were out of control, and what's important in life. A lot of us are having the time to sit back and think what's really important to us in life. We don't know how long we have, none of us, and how can we be better role models for the children like you have behind you on having to lead a more significant life, leaving a legacy to your children and grandchildren. Being better role models on, it's not just about about taking, but giving. And you feel better when you're a giver than a taker. It's not there's no limit to the bounties of the universe. It's not a fixed pie that if I'm a giver, it means I'm going to give you away something and I'm not going to get it. We get more than when we give. I am leading so much more meaningful life now than when I was doing real estate development. The joy in my life, the satisfaction is so much higher, so much greater. So hopefully more and more people will realize that.
You said one thing that has been a real commonality since I've been doing these interviews, or not interviews, but conversations with musicians all over the world, where they tell me, Alex, I was traveling to a different city every day. I didn't know what hotel I was staying at anymore. And it seems that we got a little out of control, exactly what you just said, and we need to get it down a little bit. Stephen, I'm out of coffee. I really, really appreciate your time and your knowledge, and your insight, your friendship, the book. I hope you can join us again sometime soon. Thank you very much for sharing all of this with me and with our viewers who seem to enjoy what we're doing here. This fills my heart that I get to talk to very, very intelligent people, very artists. And next week we have another interview with a non-musician. I will have a couple of friends from Sao Paulo who will be joining me, who are psychiatrists, but they have the largest collection of opera DVDs and video and CDs that I've ever seen. But this has really enriched my life. So I'm also a little bit grateful that I get to stay at home and not have to jump on planes all the time. But I really want to thank you and to wish you the best. To you and Naomi, I'm always grateful of the great time we had there in Quebec. It was so much fun, and we ate so well as well.
And you and my dog Rocky really bonded, and unfortunately Rocky's out for a walk with Naomi right now with our other dog Zoe. It's been an honor to be included in your very illustrious roster of guests. Thank you so much, Alex, even though I know nothing about music other than I like listening to it. But really, it's been wonderful talking to you, and we look forward to our ongoing friendship and with you.
Thank
and
you.
Hopefully maybe some of your viewers.
I appreciate it. Before we go, let me just say that tonight, tomorrow night, and on Saturday, we will not have interviews. We don't have a guest because I will be working with the Festival of Color. So anybody tuning in, there's some fantastic artists that are performing live, and you will be able to see that in prativaarts.com. And just a little plug for our friends there. Again, thank you very much for being with us today. It's been an honor and a great pleasure. Thank you, Stephen.
No, thank you. Bye-bye.
And until next time, thank you.